I'm going to welcome to the stage Alee Whitman. Alee previously worked for a really large cloud vendor and worked on something called Keynotes, and now she is over at Disney. And she also has recently joined our TAC. So if you were in this room just a minute ago, seeing our TAC panel, she has recently joined and will be challenging us. We're excited.
Well, first off, thank you, everyone. Seriously, this is the last session. I was expecting maybe 5 people, 10 people, so I appreciate you coming because I'm the only thing standing between you and that party. So thank you so much. My name's Alee Whitman. I'm a senior staff product engineer at the Walt Disney Company. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about, is it a savings or a spend reduction? And I'm going to talk about how we think about that using data. So before we dive into that, let's look at the Walt Disney Company businesses. So here from our company website, you can see that we think about our businesses in 3 key areas. There's Disney Entertainment, which you can think about that as Hulu, Disney Plus, our studios, ESPN, pretty self-explanatory, and then Disney Parks, Experiences, and Products, what we call DPEP. This is Disneyland, Disney World, the cruise lines, all the fun stuff that you could experience in person. I'm part of our corporate division, which means that I get to work with all of these businesses. It's one of the best places to be because I get to be a part of it all and help the different teams across our organization run efficiently on the cloud. I'm part of our cloud data transformation engineering team, and my whole role is to work across the organization to make sure that they have the tools and resources that they need to run successfully on the cloud. That can be anything from contracts to billing, all the way to working with the engineers and optimization. We're learning as we go and making sure that we evolve and mature with the teams. So let's start with the data. Before you can even say if it's a savings or not, you need to have data. And data is power, but data is complicated. So keep in mind every slide that you're going to see here is an abstract of what we think about at Disney. But it's not anything that's Disney-specific data, and it's something that you might be able to think about in terms of your organization. Disney is a multi-cloud organization, and so this is our cloud cost and usage data picture from multiple different vendors. But the process is the same. We have multiple vendors, we bring in our data together, and we put it in object storage at each of our different vendors. That's just the cloud cost and usage data that we're collecting. But we also have a lot of internal data. We think about our internal data in 2 different ways. There's our cloud account manager data. This is the data that makes it Disneyified. Think about this as what is Disney Entertainment, who does that account belong to, what is the Disney metadata that makes it meaningful. But we also have our data that makes it Disney pricing meaningful or Disney billing meaningful. Think about this as your pricing, your ad hoc reallocations, and your exception handling. An example of the ad hoc reallocations might be we get a credit issued, but it goes to the wrong account, or it goes to the billing account. We need to reallocate that. So we have a way that we can actually do it without any code changes, and I'm able to go in from a business standpoint and say, where does this need to go across my organization? Where is it reversed out of? And there's full transparency of the data so that teams can understand that, hey, this was removed here, here's where it came from, and we can do that on the fly. We also do exception handling. Not every billing file that we get goes through the same billing process. So we need to be able to remove items such as things purchased through Marketplace that are direct billed. So we're able to do exception handling as well without having to have any code changes. These are critical for being able to understand what is the actual cost of running our applications. So we collect all this data, and then we ingest it. At our organization, we use the medallion architecture, so the first step is just getting the data in there. We need to bring our data together. Once we do that, we need to normalize and transform it. This is where I say we Disneyify, and it becomes the cloud cost and usage data to the Disney cost and usage data. Here, it still is vendor-specific. We also are just Disneyifying it. We're not making any changes to the data, completely granular. We're also exposing all of this data to our businesses. So for example, Ellie down here from our Disney Entertainment team, she might need to do a use case that we don't have the answer for yet. She has full access to that data so that she can slice and dice it how she needs to while we're going along on that journey with her. So we've got that data, we have it Disneyified, but it's still not that usable unless you know the data very, very well. So now we have to aggregate and analyze it. Everyone pause here for a second and remember focus. Focus will make your life so much easier once that's available. Right now, we have to take this and we have to turn it into one Disney billing data source in itself. That means we're reinventing the wheel. We have to figure out what fields are meaningful, we have to normalize them across the cloud providers, and we have to create this on our own. Focus will solve this. Right now, you have to solve it. So let me know if you have any questions or feedback on how to solve it, because we're always looking to improve. But this is where we create our single source of Disney cloud data. Here's where we can actually now see what is our cost and what is the potential opportunity, or how would we even think about tracking savings from it. As we move along the system, our data value goes up, but our quality goes up too. So we're always looking at how we can get better data insights to our teams. For today, though, we're just focusing specifically on that cloud cost and usage data that we're trying to get Disneyified. So let's bring it back to savings now. Now that you know your cost, now you have your whole picture across your organization, across all of your vendors, let's bring it back to the savings. So everyone here, think about how many times you said the word savings just this week in your role, and what does savings actually mean? If you ask an engineering team, what is a savings, and you ask your finance team, what's a savings? Are they going to give you the same answer? Mine don't. And so this is where we actually had to take a step back and say, let's level set on what is a savings, because it's a very confusing process when our finance is saying, you can't keep saying this. I'm guilty of it. So what actually is a savings? A savings is the difference between actual cost and budget. It's your cash in hand. If you don't have a budget, you don't have a savings. Well, if it's not a savings, what is it then? Could be a spend reduction. A savings is a spend reduction, but not all spend reductions are a savings. Spend reduction is kind of the activities that lower your cost or lower your run rate. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a savings. You might be $1 million over your budget, and you might have saved money, but you really don't have any cash in hand. You're just getting closer back to what your budget is. So finance is going to say that's great, but we need to get lower. We need to actually get that to a savings. So a spend reduction is probably the most common use case of what an engineer is thinking of when they're saying savings. So how do we shift that conversation back to a savings is really a finance term, a spend reduction is what your engineering teams are actually doing. And then there's also cost avoidance. This is what I think everyone wants to get to, because if you don't have to reduce the cost, it means you did it right from the first place. So how can you avoid those costs? Cost avoidance means it's the cost that you didn't actually experience. It's that future cost. So for example, on this, maybe there's a team that way overscaled when they deployed the resources. They identified it pretty quickly and were able to remediate it. Maybe they had 1 or 2 days of cost increases, but it wasn't 365. It wasn't even a month. You won't see a run rate reduction there. So it's not necessarily a spend reduction. There's a slight tick that you might notice, but that can be still considered a cost avoidance. There's also examples of provisioning from the start. How do you optimize and architect for optimization? So starting at the beginning, how can we do those best practices from there? Cost avoidance is what we want to get to. And so this is kind of the 3 different ways that we start to think about it. At the end of the day, savings, though, is what our leadership cares about. Our leadership wants to get back to savings. So how can we make sure that we're bringing the savings back to them? Like I mentioned, the savings is that cash in hand. So before you can do that, you need to set your budget. I know there's been a lot of talks on setting budgets, and I've had multiple conversations with a lot of you across here this week about how do you think about a budget? Who's the right person to set the budgets? Who do you work with? And who owns the budget? And at what granularity? I think budgets are something that we're continuing to mature on, and it's something that we're going to continue to look at how can we better use machine learning and other innovations to make it a little bit more accurate. But at a high level, what we do is we start by looking at previous trends. What actually is happening in your accounts? So going back to the billing data, how can you make sure that you know what's happening and making sure you understand kind of what is actually running in those accounts? Next, you need to identify your business priorities. This is key. When you're identifying your business priorities, does the engineering teams know these business priorities and know what they actually mean in terms of how the business thinks about them? We see a disconnect sometimes between a business priority that's out there and the cost that business thinks it's actually going to be. Bring in the engineering teams, bring in your SRE manager to say, what is actually the cost of launching this new service? What is it actually going to be? Because we see some issues where budgets are maybe significantly underfunded because they didn't fully understand the cost to deploy this at scale. So make sure you're bringing in the right folks when you're identifying those business priorities as well too. And then finally, set your budget. So we think about it in 4 different kind of areas. Increases, the cost to build, the cost to run. Are there going to be any of those business priorities coming in or shifts in business priorities? Do you have more users that are going to be starting to use your applications that you need to have increases for? There's also decreases. Maybe you're sunsetting an application. That account's going to go away. When's the decommission schedule? What are any of the changes that you're planning to do? There's also seasonality. At Disney, we have quite a bit of seasonality. It can get hidden sometimes, but if you're just looking back for a few previous months, you might miss seasonality of an event that we had in the fall that's not picked up there. So making sure that you're accounting for the seasonality or any new seasonality that might be coming. And most importantly, run rate. If you don't know where to start looking at your run rate. Look at your run rate month over month, week over week. Get something that normalizes it and something that's meaningful for you. You're gonna get it wrong. We still get it wrong, but it's the first wrong answer that we can then improve on. So the most important thing is to set your budget, because without a budget, you really can't have a savings. So tracking against budget and goals. So how you kind of think about this at our organization is we up-level all of our budgets. So each of the different organizations provide their budget, and then our finance team brings it all together. So we have one Disney budget that's separated by our segments of our business. This is then validated by our segment partners because there's a little bit more complexity than always meets the eyes, but this is all the budgets that the teams have set, now up-leveled. So we have our starting point. But then there's always leadership goals. Leaders are going to come and say, we need to hit these business targets, we have these goals across the organization, and cloud needs to do their part. So savings targets are set by leadership. We then allocate those savings targets out to our segments based on % of spend. Similar how you'd allocate out maybe a support cost. So now they have their savings target in that orange box right there. In the gold box in the middle, that's the current state without the savings target in it. This is just looking at, hey, you have your budget, you know your actuals so far, what's our variance? And when we think about AOP, it's our operating plan, essentially our annual planning. So what's our variance so far? But that's just if we're staying to plan. That doesn't include the goal yet. This is really helpful to review with leaderships on a monthly basis, but the number they really care about and what they want to see time over time is the end. Where am I trending? Am I on track? What do I need to do? So that end area where you're looking at what is their potential actual, where do they stand on hitting their targets and their budget, this is where we review with leaders. They like to look at it month over month so they can trend. How are they doing this month versus last month? Are they actually moving the needle? What we also use this as is we have the ability to take this more granular to see, hey, where can we better support? Maybe we notice that a team is not very close to even hitting their target. What do we need to do to think more strategic? Cherry picking isn't going to help you hit this big of a gap. How can we go with them and say, what strategic initiatives can we help you guys with, or where are you guys thinking about it, that we can actually use that to meet those targets? Because cherry picking will maybe hit one of the teams that only has a little bit, but if you have a significant deficit that you have to be able to hit your savings targets on, you really need to bring in leadership and say, we need your support, we need your guidance, and we need your prioritization to make this a priority for it to work. So this green box at the end is probably the one thing that if I have a leader to look at every week, or every month, I mean, not week, that'd be a little bit excessive, but every month, this would be what I want them to see, because it knows that they're not going to hit their goal. So we measure savings on an annual basis. Budgets are annual, but we can get a good indicator of what our savings are going to be. We don't want to count our chickens before they hatch, so we always say estimated savings. It's not a savings until the year's over because a lot can change. But assuming that, say, things are handling as they are today, we would be able to look at what is our budget, what is our actuals with our forecast, and based on that, what's our estimated savings? Are we able to hit our savings goals? But here's what we're seeing right now. If, for example, someone had a new initiative that wasn't budgeted for, that came at the end of the year, this could go away. If someone did some big optimizations, this could get bigger, but it's the best metric that we have to go off of estimated savings throughout the year. So again, we set expectations with our leaders that this will change. This is dependent on usage, but it's the best view that we can give them of what their estimated savings will be. We also show them a month-by-month view. This allows us to be able to show them how they're trending month versus their remaining budget. These two things together give them a little bit of visualizations of that data on the other page, but really keep it simple for them. They don't need a ton of information until you need to dig in. Keep it simple, keep it scalable. One thing that you're seeing here, though, is we're only talking about savings. We haven't brought in the engineers yet. Engineers really don't need to think about savings in the same way that we do it from the finance standpoint. If you're an engineering team and part of one of the segments, you are just one piece of the pie. You could optimize everything. Hey, you might even be able to spin down your whole account, and you won't even be able to hit the savings targets that the organization has for your segment. So you can only do your best to make sure you're running efficiently. avoiding costs, and reducing your spend. So we think about engineering in a little bit of a different way, where engineers are all accountable and should be running efficiently, but they can only help influence the savings. They can't actually be the indicators to say that we're going to hit these savings targets unless they have a view or own all of the accounts. So when we think about engineers, how do we think about tracking their wins? And actually, our Disney Entertainment, the creator of this report, Ellie in the front right here again, she created this, and it's gotten great feedback with our leaders, so we scale it across the organization. It's taking a list that we empower our engineering teams or anyone that's optimizing to go and log. So we actually have a tracker that's not linked in this, where each of our segments across the organization have their own tracker where they go in and actually log their optimizations. It's not me logging it, it's not Ellie logging it, it's not the organization logging it, it's the actual person who's taking action. We put the accountability in the action owner to go and log their optimization. If they don't log it, they don't get the credit for it. They're not recognized, and we want to make sure that we're recognizing wins. So leaders are going into those and seeing that there's different teams that are optimizing. So it's actually gotten a lot of traction, and we have hundreds and hundreds of entries in these now. So engineers are logging it. It takes about a minute. There's ways that they can automate and make it go faster, and they're always looking to do that, but the accountability is on them. We're able to scale so much faster because we can get views on how teams across the organization are optimizing or what they're prioritizing, and how we can better support them or scale their optimizations across the board. But how do we bring that back to leadership and make sure leadership gets the view of what they need to see with it? We bring it back to leadership by up-leveling it. So we cherry pick out of that list what are the strategic ones or the ones that leadership are able to see move the needle on their run rate reductions. Again, we're not calling it savings here. We're calling it a run rate reduction. Because when we're thinking about optimization, we're just thinking about the run rate here and more of the spend reduction, not the actual savings. This is more of the tactical view. So we up-level the key wins, but we also track it as a scoreboard. And we're tracking it against the scoreboard of your recent wins, but also your achieved to date. And what has been your run rate reductions? We're not bringing it back to savings again. This is just meant to see run rate reductions and how the engineering teams are able to move the needle. We also use this as a platform to highlight risks. We have leaders' eyes. We want to make sure that they know that if there's risks that we need their support with. Maybe there's going to be a constraint with a new initiative coming, and the team that needs to launch this new initiative is also a team that has the largest optimization opportunity. We need to know, how do we prioritize this? How do we make sure that we're reaching their goals? Every optimization takes effort, so how do we make sure that if there's a bandwidth or a resourcing constraint? These are just two examples, but typically they're very pointed and at the way that we want to influence leadership to better support us and our engineers. So now that we've kind of taken a look at what is savings, how do we actually track it, how do we think about it from an engineering perspective, or not think about savings from an engineering perspective and think about those spend reductions, we kind of all bring it back to what did we learn and how do we think about this in the future? I think the first lesson that we learned is we don't have to do it all. And what I mean by that is bringing it back to the data. There is so many of you in this room today that are probably facing some of the similar problems that we have. And if we come together and are able to push on our cloud service providers to better standardize data for us, again, focus, we're then able to have that one less thing for us to do and one easier thing on our plate that we can now work together and all speak the same language in. So don't try to do everything. If there's something that you think you're facing a problem in and every other customer is too, let's bring it to our vendors. Let's use the foundation to up-level that and get real change at the level where it's going to matter so we don't have to muck around in it. The second lesson learned is really set expectations on what does a word mean. The S word gets thrown around. Savings gets thrown around so much. I challenge you to use savings in a meaningful way. Make sure you're using it in a way that makes sense to your organization. It might not be the same way it means it to ours, but set expectations with your teams on what a savings is and what the other types of reductions are or optimizations are. And finally, make sure you're open to change. You're gonna get it wrong. We're getting it wrong every day, but we're improving on it, and we're taking our teams along with us on the journey. So as you're going through this, make sure you know that things will change and set your teams up for the expectations that this is just our first wrong answer and we're going to move forward. So I thank you guys all for coming, and I will be at the event later so we can network, share ideas. Also, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or after the talk. And I think, Ashley, do we have a little bit of time for questions, or do we need to play the video? Perfect. So we have a little bit of time for questions too.
If anyone has a question, I'll go ahead and pass you this mic. Oh, you're across the room. I'm coming for you. Can you catch?
So you talked about run rate reduction and engineers manually entering that in. How do you deal with inaccuracies, them saying we reduced by 1.5, but they only reduced by 500K? Do you run into challenges around there?
So we do try and validate, but again, the teams there's not as many folks to validate as there are folks optimizing. And so if you think about how we think about a savings doesn't actually have to do with the fields that the teams are logging. That's indicators. So if we don't get it right on the first try, it's better than nothing. At least we can see the action they took. In terms of our savings, we're really using those run rate reduction pieces of it, so we're able to actually quantify it. The ones that do get up-leveled to leadership do get validated, though. We make sure those ones actually are validated, and there's a column that says if it's validated or not, so if a leader does look at the full list, they're able to know if it was validated or not. And it's actually a good conversation starter if they say it's not validated, because they'll ask why. Why aren't these validated? Well, maybe we need some more support. If you guys want to see these validated in real time, maybe let's bring on another analyst to help us.
Hey, thanks for the great talk. I have a question. Can you please share what kind of data do you have for like Disney, as a Disney kind of a description? What kind of a metadata do you store and how do you store it?
So metadata is it varies across the board, but at a high level for a billing standpoint, we really need to know where the account belongs, where it should be charged back to, the owner of the account. And so think about it from the team that provisions. So I'm part of the team that actually does all the provisioning of accounts too. My broader team does that. And so when you provision an account, what do you need to have from an accountability standpoint on it? That's a lot of the metadata that we collect there. Segments themselves also have their own metadata, so we're actually looking at how we can support multiple types of metadata that bring it beyond just the level that we bill onto. In the back here?
Yeah. So cost reduction, cost optimization, cost avoidance. So normally that is, and then that relate to efficiency. Why let's say cost optimization is not equal to a saving? Means, is it a saving a subpart of a cost optimization? Why you select that kind of a different one?
So cost optimization, so if you think about what a savings is, a savings to finance is cash in hand. You actually have to be able to save the money. If you have a cost optimization, a savings is a cost optimization, but not all cost optimizations are savings because they don't actually lead to that cost in hand. So that's why we have to separate them out. I'm still guilty of it. I mix it up sometimes and I'll say the savings word. But to our finance, we need to meet them where they're at. And if you think about it, it's about making money. You have to be actually saving money to make that money. And so we really do need to separate those terms out. But if you're talking and you don't know what word to use, just use spend reduction or cost reduction, because that encompasses the savings as well.
I didn't tell him I was going to do that. We're going to take one more question, and then please stay around because it's going to be a really cool video, and then we're going to go.
Perfect.
Cool. Hey, so my question was, how does unit cost apply to budgeting? Right? When you're thinking about setting a budget, you're assuming a certain amount of traffic or whatever it is that's going to cost you that. So if you have a surge in traffic, that could be good. How do you guys think about that in terms of setting budgets and savings?
I would say we think about it probably 100 different ways. And the reason for that is look at Disney, and if you went back to that our businesses slide, there's so many different businesses. So certain businesses have different ways of thinking at it. Some might have a more mature level of forecasting, and they're really getting down to cost per subscriber, or cost per device, or cost per ride, or whatever their meaningful metric is. Some might say, we don't really have a good standpoint on what that, if it's a variable cost, if it's a fixed cost. We're still at an earlier stage in our journey. Here's how we're thinking about it. We really just encourage them to do their assumptions, and we work with them to get more mature as they go along. So I'd say there's not a perfect science to it, and if any of you do have a perfect science and you have an organization similar to Disney where there's multiple different types of businesses in it, I'd love to learn how maybe we can improve and how we can bring that back.
Let's give her a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching that session. I'm sitting here in San Diego right after FinOps X. We hope you join us next year here live 2024. In the meantime, please subscribe to the channel and join the community. Get involved, join the summits, get in a working group, and don't forget to get FinOps certified. is next year here in San Diego for FinOps X, it's going to be twice as big. Come join the party. Come meet your people. Welcome home.